The Halloween night descended upon the city like a cold, heavy blanket, promising chaos. Dylan, the highly efficient gig economy courier, felt the last involuntary spasm of his muscles as he folded his high-speed electric bike into its specialized storage unit. It had been an utterly relentless shift. The surge in demand for late-night party gear and elaborate costume materials had caused his dispatch app to flash incessantly. After almost 2 years navigating the city's grid, the physical fatigue was a dull, constant ache, but the almost desperate need for his worn recliner and a bad B-movie was a sharp, almost painful sensation that radiated from his spine. The digital clock in his sightline read 11:47 p.m. as he finally logged out from the anonymous warehouse where he based his operations. The alley reeked of stale rainwater and a peculiar, overly sweet, burnt sugar smell, perhaps some exotic incense used by extreme revelers. The sky was an infinite starless black, suggesting that the very cosmos was participating in a dark, silent conspiracy. Dylan threw his professional backpack over his shoulder. It was significantly lighter now, containing only his power banks and a half-full water bottle. He faced a 20-block hike to the bus terminal that served his lower rent district, a trek that, at this particular hour, felt less like commuting and more like an unsolicited trial of survival. As he walked, the calendar's influence was oppressively obvious. He glimpsed 2 teenagers in genuinely unsettling homemade zombie masks aggressively arguing near a dumpster, and further down, a group of college students dressed as cartoon mascots, one of them struggling to carry a massive, industrial-sized bag of high-end chocolate bars. This image struck him, a sudden sharp memory of childhood excitement mixed with adult paranoia. He remembered his own youth when trick-or-treating felt genuinely dangerous. Tonight, his accumulated urban caution was his only shield. Dylan cut through the shortcut onto Edison Boulevard, a wide street known for its eerie quiet after 10 p.m. The streetlights here were unreliable, save for a massive glowing pawnshop sign whose red neon projected a sickly, unreliable crimson glow over the wet asphalt. Just as he passed a huge looming abandoned meatpacking plant, he heard a distinct sound. It wasn't a thump, but a soft, meticulously rhythmic scuffing, like polished leather dragging across rough concrete. He froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. Automatically, he reached for his phone's flashlight app. He aimed the weak beam toward the factory wall, but the light was absorbed entirely by the deep, inky shadows beneath the rusted loading docks. He thought of every tired horror film trope. Run, don't investigate. He almost laughed at the predictability of the situation, attempting to mentally subdue his rising anxiety. But the scuffing repeated, now clearly closer to the edge of the curb, undeniably artificial. "Hey, who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly under the strain, an immediate, terrifying silence. He waited for a tense 15 seconds. He was about to break the cardinal rule and turn back when a figure emerged from the deep shadows. It wasn't a costume menace. It was a small, fragile-looking woman, wearing a vintage flapper dress that looked stained and worn, like something pulled from a long-forgotten trunk. She was leaning heavily against the brickwork, her breathing audibly ragged. In her hand, she clutched a heavy, rusted hand-crank coffee grinder that she had been dragging, the source of the unsettling noise. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I guess that thing makes a hell of a noise," she gasped, her voice unexpectedly smooth and deep. "Are you walking to the light rail? I've been stranded out here for almost 40 minutes. Dylan felt an immense, humbling sense of relief and embarrassment. He put his phone away. Her name was Ava, and she was coming from an underground speakeasy party that had turned hostile, as she described it. They immediately bonded over the shared misery of finding late-night public transport. Ava worked as a freelance illustrator, a job that, like Dylan's, required immense stamina and an intimate, cynical relationship with the city's worst hours. The wait for the delayed train became strangely enjoyable. They talked about the city's desperate need for escapism through costume, and how the act of disguising herself somehow made her feel more authentically herself. The juxtaposition of Ava's glamorous, fragile costume and her tough, practical demeanor regarding the transit system completely fascinated Dylan. They recognized the same profound exhaustion that comes from pushing oneself to the limit. When a true yellow cab finally materialized, over an hour after Dylan had clocked out, they decided to share the fare. Her apartment building was a slight, manageable detour on his route. Inside the cab, the air was warm, and their conversation flowed effortlessly. They joked about pointless holiday sales and the shared, isolating experience of the late-night workforce. Upon reaching Ava's building, a classic pre-war structure with arched windows, she lightly squeezed his forearm goodbye. "Thanks, Dylan. That was the best kind of late-night interruption." He experienced the familiar urge to ask for her contact information, but let it pass. He watched her ascend the marble steps of the entrance. The cab pulled away into the night. The driver, a quiet older man wearing thin glasses, did not speak a word. Dylan watched the streets blur by, already wondering about Ava. When they reached his modest building, he paid the metered fare, adding a substantial tip, and stepped out into the returning cold. He stood briefly in front of his door, a typical beige-colored block. There, sitting right beside the keypad, someone had placed a small ceramic skull with a tiny flickering LED flame inside. He immediately wondered if the maintenance staff had done it, or if Ava had somehow managed to get there first. The profound mystery, instead of instilling fear, sparked a sharp, invigorating thrill. He unlocked the door, the weight of his belongings suddenly negligible, convinced that this night had gifted him a small, perfectly constructed piece of lore. He drifted to sleep, thinking about the rhythmic scuff of the grinder and the girl who had broken the sterile perfection of his routine. The final grinding echo of the metal gate reverberated down the canyon of concrete. Victor tightened the scarf around his throat as he applied the 4-point lock to the vast, sliding door of the Continental Logistics Depot. He had just finished his 12-hour shift as the night shift security supervisor, a position demanding constant vigilance over highly sensitive cargo, complex surveillance systems, and the immense, terrifying solitude of a massive, echoing structure. Halloween hadn't penetrated the depot's high walls, but the exhaustion was profound, fueled by the relentless pressure of the looming holiday shipping peak. It was precisely 10:55 p.m. when he finally stepped onto the desolate access road. The air was a biting mixture of industrial cold and fog. The area was characterized by huge, silent warehouses and towering silos. The lighting was hostile, provided by flickering high-pressure sodium lamps that cast an aggressive, sickly orange glow. He knew his only reliable bus route was 7 long blocks away, forcing him to cross 2 segments of the road that were historically infamous for being entirely unpatrolled. As he walked, the silence was overwhelming, a presence in itself. Unlike the distant residential zones, there were no cheerful porch lights or decorative skeletons, just the oppressive, metallic geometry of the buildings. He carried his duty bag slung low, and inside, a high-powered tactical flashlight, a necessary tool that, tonight, felt more like a flimsy prayer against the deep, lurking dark. Reaching a dangerous intersection marked by a sputtering traffic signal that blinked a slow, disturbing amber, Victor saw an anomaly. Leaning against the vandalized brick wall of a defunct storage facility was a figure dressed as a classical Roman centurion, absolutely static, his armor painted a dull, realistic bronze. The lack of motion was unnerving. It was a stillness that spoke of an almost inhuman patience. Victor immediately crossed to the opposite sidewalk. While he prided himself on objectivity, the sheer discipline of the pose at this lonely hour triggered every professional warning he possessed. The figure didn't stir. It's probably just a student doing a performance piece for tips, or someone whose party ended early, Victor rationalized, fighting the urge to sprint. Past the storage unit, the street tightened. That's when he heard it. A faint, desperate wheezing, like someone struggling to catch their breath, emanating from the black cavity of a narrow tunnel that disappeared beneath the main freeway ramp. He stopped, rigid. The sound was too genuine to be a prank. His security-trained mind, focused on threat assessment, warred with basic human compassion. He took one step toward the tunnel entrance. "Security here! Are you hurt? Talk to me!" he demanded, his voice echoing back at him. The wheezing devolved into a short, choked cough. Suddenly, a filthy, matted, furred coyote burst from the tunnel, a piece of something unidentifiable in its mouth, startled by the intrusion. Victor sagged with immediate relief. The noise must have been an animal attack. He cursed his overactive imagination, but when he glanced back at the wall, the Roman centurion was gone. Not moving, but simply absent. He marched toward the main thoroughfare, feeling profoundly watched. When he reached the bus shelter, he found Leo, a forensic photographer who worked for the state medical examiner's office downtown. Leo wore a dark trench coat and carried a heavy, waterproof Pelican case filled with equipment. "This night is already too weird, even for the city," Victor commented, forcing a smile. "Tell me about it." "We had to process a very creative party prank gone wrong." "Everything felt staged," Leo replied, shaking his head. They settled down to wait. The bus schedule display had failed entirely. To Victor's genuine surprise, Leo unzipped an inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small bag of bright purple saltwater taffy. "Take some. Our team leader had these delivered to the morgue. Said it was a mandatory morale boost for dealing with the holiday chaos." Victor accepted a piece, the sweet, chewy taffy a bizarre contrast to the sterile night. They talked about their respective fields, one focused on prevention, the other on grim aftermath, the two essential services that keep the city from completely falling apart. When the bus finally arrived, they boarded quickly. Leo took a seat near the back. They exchanged a brief nod goodbye. Leo got off just after crossing the river. Victor continued his ride. Reaching his condo building, a typical beige suburban structure, he opened the main mail slot. Tucked into his own box, he found an item that wasn't mail. It was a small, detailed plastic miniature of a Roman centurion, painted bronze with tiny flecks of white. It was an impossible object. He picked it up, the cold plastic a definite reality in his hand. He wasn't hallucinating. The object had been placed there deliberately. He felt less afraid and more like the pawn in a meticulous, high-stakes game. He locked his door, falling asleep wondering if the figure was connected to the Courier from the previous story, and if the Centurion was a harbinger of coming events. The city on Halloween was simply a theater of the absurd. Chloe felt a pleasing decompression as the monumental ancestral silence took hold. She had just finished manually locking down the exhibition vaults of the City Museum of Classic Arts, following a highly exclusive late-night gala. As the senior curator, her responsibilities didn't end until the last mink-clad donor, often wearing an elaborate historical mask, had departed. For her, Halloween was less a festival and more a biannual opportunity for the city's powerful to disguise their political and financial ambitions. It was precisely 12:15 a.m. when she used her keycard on the discreet service door, which opened onto a dark, slick, granite-paved alleyway. She held her antique clutch close and guarded her calfskin-bound folio containing irreplaceable historical documents, items she would never entrust to the museum's overnight safe. The biting night air was a shock after the overheated warmth of the main gallery. She walked deliberately, the echo of her leather boots sharp against the stone. On the avenue, she quickly bypassed a pair of young adults in ridiculous foam astronaut suits who were loudly singing a popular anthem. Chloe sped up, feeling intensely conspicuous in her bespoke navy suit amid the wild spectacle. As she passed a tall, Forbidding bronze gate, she noticed something unusual on the ground. A thick envelope made of linen paper, slightly marred by what looked like dried ink. She picked it up. Inside there was a single folded sheet containing a densely handwritten text, unsigned, undated, a diary fragment. It was a mesmerizing, disturbing entry about the profound difficulty of separating one's own identity from the historical record. It was deeply personal, unsettling, and perfectly resonant with her current work stress. The immediate, intense pull of the text yanked her away from her professional fatigue. She decided to stop at an adjacent, slightly run-down diner that advertised 24-hour service to read it under focused light. The diner was nearly empty, occupied only by a waitress and a man at the counter. The man, Jasper, wore a threadbare smoking jacket and was meticulously sketching something on a napkin. He seemed completely disconnected from the diner's reality. The forgotten whispers of the city always manage to reach the listeners, don't they? Jasper murmured without glancing up from his sketch pad. Chloe froze. Did you see me find this? I saw your recognition when you touched it. It's the look of someone who knows the difference between a copy and an original, and especially the power of a private confession. Jasper introduced himself as a conceptual cartographer who spent his life mapping the appearance of lost narratives across the city during periods of heightened tension. According to him, the fragment she held was part of a self-selecting dialogue that certain local historians used during holidays to test the city's psychological landscape. The discussion that followed was stimulating, bordering on surreal. They talked about the difference between the cataloged history she managed and the spontaneous emotional history he documented. Jasper was in no rush, and Chloe found the intellectual escape addictive. They discussed the purpose of concealment, the costumes used to hide both the face and the truth. After nearly an hour, Chloe realized the time. She thanked Jasper, the gratitude feeling like a sacred oath, and left the diner with the precious fragment carefully placed in her portfolio. She found a rideshare service. The journey home was calm. Arriving at her elegant Victorian house, she noticed a strange detail. The mail slot on her front door had been carefully decorated with a tiny, dried flower wreath tied with a silver wire, and hanging from it was a small, engraved copper plate bearing her name, Chloe. This was not a cheap store item, but a genuine piece of personalized craft. The city's cold anonymity had suddenly become intensely focused. She unlocked her door, went inside, and reread the fragment. The final line had a chilling addendum, written in a different hand. The artifact finds the custodian. Now, keep the secret. Halloween had shifted from being a job to a private, mandatory mission. Kyle ripped off his expensive noise-isolating headphones and felt the persistent static buzz of the high-powered servers in his auditory canals. He had just completed his shift as a lead systems engineer at the Global Data Hub, an imposing glass and steel fortress in the heart of the metropolitan tech zone. His responsibility was the maintenance of uninterrupted data flow, a job made exponentially worse on Halloween due to the predictable spike in amateur DDoS attacks and sophisticated ransomware attempts disguised as holiday greetings. It was 1:35 a.m., the deepest, most quiet hour of the night. His backpack felt burdensome, loaded with his specialized diagnostic laptop and several proprietary network tools. The consciousness of carrying such highly sensitive technology made him feel like a glaring target on the empty streets. He stepped outside, relishing the cold, clean air after the pressurized sterility of the server farm. As he walked toward the elevated rail station, his eyes caught a detail on the window of a permanently open internet cafe. Scrawled on a whiteboard was a cryptic, dense sequence of hexadecimal code that, to an untrained eye, was pure junk data. Kyle stopped instantly. His mind, conditioned to spot anomalies, ran a rapid decryption sequence. It was not random. It was a perfectly formatted executable script, encoded with an ancient, highly specific cryptogram. The decoded message was stark. Listen. Kyle felt a shiver, a sensation that originated deep in his professional core. Was it a challenge from a rival firm, or a sophisticated digital breadcrumb left just for him? He decided to continue, but the strange, single-word command resonated. Reaching the train platform, which was utterly deserted, the automated schedule display was flickering violently and emitting a sharp, metallic whine. He sat down to endure the train's inevitable delay announcement. Just then, a woman arrived and settled 2 benches down. She was dressed in an elaborate steampunk gown with leather gears and brass fixtures. She was furiously typing on a specialized miniature keyboard. Kyle debated his options, but his engineer's compulsion to solve the data puzzle took over. He approached her. "Excuse me, but did you happen to notice the hex code at the net cafe?" The woman Leah looked up. Her eyes, magnified by a strange pair of brass goggles, sparkled with an almost predatory intelligence. "Ah, the echo code. Yes, I wrote it. It's a subtle reminder that the firewall is always just an illusion." Leah was a cybersecurity consultant who had just finished a marathon session coding a new security protocol. She explained that she used the hex code as an internal signature for her most complex projects. A hidden message for those who understand the language of chaos. They shared the downtime. Leah complained about the intellectual drain of security work, and Kyle lamented the physical toll of maintenance. They traded high-level views on technology. For him, it was order. For her, it was elegant subversion. The tension that had been gripping Kyle began to dissipate. When the train finally arrived, a massive, noisy vehicle, they boarded. Leah got off just a few stops later, giving him a quick salute. Kyle continued his journey. Arriving at his high-rise, he felt strangely alert. He didn't turn on his work laptop. Instead, he used a simple, impromptu script he'd just developed to reprogram his building's elevator lights to flash in Morse code, a harmless prank inspired by Leah's mischievous spirit. Before going to sleep, he checked the front pocket of his jacket. Tucked inside was a heavy metallic USB key with no markings. It was definitely not his. He plugged it into his computer. It contained one single file, networkghosts.log. Inside, a much longer hexadecimal sequence than the one at the cafe. It immediately decrypted to, "Kyle, the core vulnerability is in the silence between the data packets." He looked around his silent apartment. The status light on his router was pulsing with a pattern he'd never observed. Halloween had left him with an unsolvable, compelling intellectual task, and the unsettling realization that he wasn't the only one fluent in the city's digital secrets. Maya felt a profound wave of peace as she systematically deactivated the lights in the historic university annex, the specialized rare book wing. As the solo night archivist, she was the final person to depart from the endless stacks of fragile documents. Halloween Eve always left her utterly drained. The public flocked to the archives in search of obscure historical conspiracies and forbidden local lore. The formidable, heavy brass key to the vault was her last tangible link to the present world. It was exactly 11 p.m., the precise hour when, according to the documents under her care, the boundaries of reality became porous. Maya exited the building's main stone entrance, a monolithic structure that embodied perpetual stillness. The air was heavy with the scent of cold smoke and desiccated herbs, a potent mixture that mirrored the interior of the oldest texts she managed. She walked quickly, her path dictated by the quickest route to the transit center, dodging groups of costumed student revelers. Her mind was intensely focused on the linguistic evolution of historical euphemisms for death. She harbored no fear of ghosts. Her true fear was the intentional omission of truth in any historical narrative. As she passed a tall, moss-covered fence bordering an ancient cemetery, she heard a faint, low chant, almost inaudible. It wasn't random sound, but a distinct poetic meter, like someone reciting an epic poem at a whisper. She stopped. Maya's ear was finely tuned to the nuances of language. The chant was in Old Norse. She moved cautiously toward the fence line. "Baratar," she queried, using the standard opening line from an Icelandic saga she'd just cataloged. The chanting ceased instantly. Instead, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a woman of indeterminate age dressed in a simple heavy wool cloak and boots. She carried a thick unmarked ledger book tied with rough twine. She was not in costume. "I am merely reciting the Edda aloud, my dear," the woman said, her voice rich and melodic. "I find the density of the language here enhances the meaning." "Are you from the archives?" Maya admitted her profession. The woman, Astrid, revealed herself to be a comparative mythologist who had just finished a private research seminar. She had chosen that spot to read because, as she explained, the energy of the old stones provides better resonance for dead languages. Maya and Astrid walked together toward the transit hub. They shared a fascinating exchange about the common errors in translating cultural concepts and how a single word's misinterpretation could alter an entire belief system. Maya felt a profound, almost spiritual connection with her. When the commuter train arrived, they boarded and sat across from each other. The conversation deepened, touching on the nature of memory and its preservation, until Astrid departed in a quiet, forested suburb. Astrid placed the ledger book in Maya's hands. "Keep this. It is my personal compilation of errors. Find the root mistake. If you must, rewrite the flawed history." Maya felt the impressive weight of the book, a responsibility settling upon her. Upon reaching her small carriage house apartment, she took off her coat. Lying on her antique writing desk, a detail instantly confused her. A small wooden box filled with smooth, river-worn runestones, tied with a piece of brittle, dark thread. They were not hers. The stones looked ancient, as if recently unearthed. She opened Astrid's ledger. It contained no Norse, only a single typed page bearing the same meticulous, unsettling font as the other stories. "Maya, the story's key is not in what you find, but in what you choose to forget." She felt completely immersed in a structured, pre-written narrative. The stones, the book, the Old Norse chant. Her exhaustion was gone, replaced by a desperate, intellectual need to decipher her role in this Halloween night. The night, which should have been a brief respite from history, had become the catalyst for its reevaluation.